What if the future king has already decided that some lines once crossed can never be uncrossed, and that behind palace walls, a silent investigation has already begun to rewrite the fate of an entire royal bloodline? The whispers didn't start loud, they never do. They began as faint murmurs in 2019, almost too quiet to notice, circling around Meghan Markle during her first pregnancy. At first, it was curiosity, then confusion, then patterns, and once people began connecting those patterns, the noise became impossible to ignore because something about the timeline didn't sit right. Something about the decisions felt off. Archie's birth, May 6, 2019, should have been a clean, celebratory moment, but instead it arrived wrapped in contradictions. A planned home birth suddenly shifted to a hospital nearly 20 miles away. Announcements that didn't align with reality. Reports suggesting labor was ongoing when the baby had already been born. And then the detail that truly unsettled observers, returning home just 2 hours after delivery. 2 hours. Was that even physically possible? Or was this the first crack in a story that had been carefully constructed? And then came the silence. Not the peaceful kind, the suspicious kind. Unlike Prince William and Catherine, Princess of Wales, who followed long-standing royal tradition by presenting their newborns almost immediately, Meghan and Prince Harry waited. Not hours, days. More than 2 full days before revealing Archie to the world. In a monarchy built on visibility and ritual, that delay didn't just raise eyebrows, it ignited questions. But the questions didn't stop there. They multiplied. 11 days after the birth, Archie's birth certificate was quietly altered. Meghan's name changed to Her Royal Highness the Duchess of Sussex. A formal adjustment, perhaps. But why make it at all? Why touch a document that historically remains untouched? For some, it felt administrative. For others, it felt like a clue. Then 2021 arrived, California, distance from the royal spotlight, and the birth of Lilibet. This time, the privacy was complete. No royal protocols, no immediate scrutiny. But instead of calming the rumors, the silence fed them. Because in the absence of information, speculation thrives. And now, the whispers weren't just whispers anymore, they were theories. Organized, repeated, amplified. Enter Lady Colin Campbell, a figure who doesn't just observe royal controversy, she dives straight into it. And this time, she didn't hold back. She demanded answers, not vague statements, not carefully worded reassurances. Proof, direct, undeniable proof that Meghan had given birth to both children. Her argument was simple but explosive. For centuries, royal births were witnessed to protect the legitimacy of the crown. So why now, in one of the most scrutinized royal families in the world, was that transparency missing? And suddenly, the story shifted. This wasn't just gossip anymore. This was becoming something else. Something heavier. Something dangerous. Because once the question of legitimacy enters the conversation, it doesn't just hover, it threatens everything beneath it. Then came more voices. Samantha Markle stepped forward, adding fuel to an already volatile situation. Claims about frozen eggs. Conversations that allegedly happened months before Archie's birth. And each new statement didn't clarify the situation, it deepened the mystery. Because now, multiple narratives were colliding and none of them aligned perfectly. And yet, the palace remained quiet. Why? Was it strategy? Was it caution? Or was it something else entirely? Because behind that silence, another story was quietly unfolding. One that didn't involve interviews or Instagram posts, one that didn't play out in public. A story centered around power, control, and a man who is preparing step by step for the moment he will wear the crown. Prince William. Insiders began noticing a shift. Subtle at first, then sharper. A difference in tone between him and King Charles III. Where Charles appeared patient, even forgiving, William was described as something else entirely. Calculated, focused, unwavering. A man who doesn't just react to crises, but anticipates them. And what if this entire controversy wasn't just a scandal to him? What if it was an opportunity? Because if the legitimacy of the line of succession is ever questioned, even slightly, the consequences are seismic. Titles can be reviewed. Positions can be reconsidered. And in the quiet language of monarchy, clarification can mean removal. Now pause for a second. Think about the timing, the growing rumors, the increasing pressure, the strategic silence. And William stepping forward more decisively than ever before, speaking about change, welcoming it. Coincidence or coordination? Because those close to the palace are beginning to whisper something even more unsettling. That this isn't just about truth, it's about control, about reshaping the monarchy for a new era, one where loose ends are no longer tolerated and where personal relationships take a back seat to institutional survival. And if that's true, then this isn't just Meghan's crisis. It's a test of how far the monarchy is was willing to go to protect itself, a test of whether family still matters when the crown is at stake, and most importantly, a test of what Prince William is truly capable of doing once the power is fully his. Because if these whispers are even partially true, then what comes next won't just shock the public. It will redefine everything we thought we understood about the royal family. And the most dangerous part, this story is just getting started. And just when it feels like the storm couldn't possibly intensify, something shifts quietly, almost invisibly, behind the palace walls, and suddenly, this isn't just about rumors anymore, it's about law, power, and a ticking clock that no one is publicly acknowledging, but everyone behind closed doors seems to be watching. Because here's the part that changes everything. The moment this story stops being gossip and starts becoming a constitutional problem, at the center of it all sits an uncomfortable truth wrapped in centuries-old tradition. The rules governing the British throne are not modern, flexible ideas. They are rigid, deeply rooted frameworks built on bloodline certainty. The Act of Settlement 1701 and the Succession to the Crown Act 2013 were designed to ensure one thing above all else: legitimacy that cannot be questioned. But what happens when a modern reality, like surrogacy, collides with laws that never anticipated it? That's where the ground starts to shake. Because under traditional legal interpretation, a principle echoes through history like a warning: mater semper certa est, the mother is always certain. Except, in today's world, that certainty isn't always so simple. If a surrogate is involved, the legal framework doesn't automatically align with royal expectations. And that single crack in the system, it's all it takes for doubt to enter the conversation. And once doubt is there, it doesn't just sit quietly, it spreads. Now think about the implications. Prince Archie currently stands sixth in line to the throne. Princess Lilibet follows closely behind. These aren't distant, irrelevant positions, they are dangerously close to the center of power. One unexpected shift, one unforeseen event, and suddenly those positions matter in ways the public isn't prepared for. Which means any uncertainty, real or perceived, becomes a risk the monarchy cannot afford to ignore. And that's where things get even more unsettling. Because insiders have begun hinting at something that sounds almost too strategic to be accidental. That even without proving anything outright, simply raising questions privately, legally, structurally, could be enough to trigger reviews. Reviews that don't need headlines. Reviews that don't need public announcements. Just quiet internal decisions that reshape the future without ever fully explaining themselves. And suddenly, the silence from Buckingham Palace doesn't feel passive anymore. It feels calculated. But then, just when the pressure reached its peak, Meghan Markle made her move. Not through a press conference, not through legal documents, but through something far more unpredictable. A video, a maternity ward clip filmed years earlier showing her dancing alongside Prince Harry before the birth of their daughter. At first glance, it looked personal, intimate, almost playful. But the timing was impossible to ignore. Released years after it was filmed, right as the rumors were reaching a boiling point. Was it a genuine attempt to shut down speculation, or was it a carefully chosen distraction? Something emotional enough to shift the narrative without directly addressing the accusations. Because instead of ending the conversation, it intensified it. Viewers didn't just watch the video, they analyzed it, frame by frame, movement by movement. Every detail became evidence. Supporters saw authenticity. Critics saw inconsistencies. And suddenly, one video became a battlefield where perception mattered more than proof. Medical experts stepped in, attempting to ground the chaos in reality. Explanations about heart rate monitors, about natural variations in pregnancy appearance. Logical, reasonable, scientifically sound. But logic doesn't always win in a story driven by suspicion, because once people believe there's something to uncover, every explanation starts to feel like a cover. And while the public dissected every second of that video, something far more serious was unfolding in parallel, because Prince William wasn't reacting emotionally. He wasn't engaging publicly. He was doing something far more dangerous, nothing visible at all. And that kind of silence, it's not absence, it's preparation. Those closest to the inner circle describe a man who has already made up his mind about certain things. A man who sees the monarchy not as a family, but as an institution that must survive no matter the cost. And when you start looking at his recent actions through that lens, a pattern begins to emerge. The handling of Prince Andrew, stripped of titles, removed from public life, wasn't just a response to scandal. It was a signal, a demonstration of what happens when someone becomes a liability. So the question becomes unavoidable. Who decides what counts as a liability? Because if the legitimacy of royal heirs becomes even a whisper of uncertainty, that's not just a personal issue, it's a structural threat. And structural threats don't get ignored. They get managed quietly, efficiently, permanently. And here's where the tension tightens even further, because the relationship between William and Harry isn't just strained, it's fractured. Years of distrust, warnings that were ignored, decisions that created distance not just geographically, but emotionally. And when emotion disappears from a relationship like that, what's left? Strategy, calculation, distance that makes difficult decisions easier to execute. Insiders claim that William doesn't see this as betrayal anymore. He sees it as inevitability, loose ends that must be tied, questions that must be answered, not for personal closure, but for institutional clarity. And if that means confronting issues that others would rather avoid, so be it. And then there's 2026, the year that keeps appearing in quiet conversations, in subtle hints, in timelines that seem too aligned to be accidental. A year described as pivotal, transformational, the moment where decisions that have been building in the shadows finally begin to surface. Because look at what's happening simultaneously. Professional setbacks tightening around Harry and Meghan, deals collapsing, public support fluctuating, external pressures mounting from multiple directions at once. And inside the palace, a united front forming around William and Catherine, Princess of Wales, a partnership that signals stability, authority, and alignment on whatever comes next. This isn't chaos, it's convergence. And in the middle of that convergence sits the most dangerous possibility of all, that the surrogacy question, whether proven, disproven, or left deliberately unresolved, becomes a tool, not necessarily to expose truth, but to create just enough uncertainty to justify action. Because in the world of monarchy, perception doesn't just influence reality, it can replace it. So now the story stands at a crossroads. On one side, official records, documented facts, statements that assert clarity. On the other, persistent questions, strategic silence, and a growing sense that something bigger is unfolding beneath the surface. And the most unsettling part? We may never get a single definitive answer. Because if decisions are made quietly, behind closed doors, through mechanisms the public never fully sees, then the outcome will appear as fact, even if the process remains a mystery. So ask yourself this: if the future king believes that protecting the monarchy requires difficult, even ruthless choices, how far is he willing to go? Because whatever happens next won't just affect Meghan Markle or Prince Harry. It will reshape the rules of power, legitimacy, and silence itself inside one of the most watched institutions in the world. And if the pieces we're seeing now are only the beginning, then the real story, the one no one is ready to confirm yet, is still unfolding, just out of sight, waiting for the moment when it can no longer be hidden.